Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual event with Orbit Live and two great science fiction authors. James S. A. Corey is the pseudonym for authors Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank. We have Daniel joining us here today, representing James, and they are the author of the Expanse series, which is now a hit TV show. Some of you may have seen it. Tade Thompson is the author of the Wormwood trilogy, which started with Rosewater. Both series are nominees this year for the Hugo Award for Best Series, so these are really two of the most exciting science fiction authors that we have right now. If you haven't read their books, I highly recommend that you start. Tade and Daniel will be talking to each other about those books, but they'll also be answering your questions. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see an Ask a Question button. You can enter your questions there and also vote on your fellow attendees' questions so that the most popular questions are the first to get answered. I can see that there are already some questions in there. Keep them coming. This event is being recorded, and after it concludes, you'll be able to watch the replay and share that with your friends using the same Crowdcast event link that you used to enter. And follow us on Crowdcast to be notified about future Orbit Live events. We have some exciting ones coming up. There are two next week. One of them is a science fiction-oriented event. One's a fantasy event, so we've got the whole spread covered. Just a quick note that we've been having some technical glitches and some sketchy internet connections, so if one of the authors, the video blips out, just bear with us. We'll try to get everything sorted out again. And now, without further ado, I'm very pleased to turn over this event to Tade and Daniel. Take it away, guys.
Right. Hi, everybody. So our first question comes from Christian A, and it's going to be directed towards Daniel. Much of sci-fi seems to be about introducing a foreign or novel agent into civilization and trying to think about how humans would react. I love how The Expanse and Rosewater have dealt with this concept. Once you had decided on your agents, Epstein Drive, Protomolecule, Wormwood, Xenosphere, what was your process for examining the multitude of consequences that resulted from each? So Daniel.
I get to take that one, do I? Okay. But you know,
yes.
as Ellen said, I'm half of James S. A. Corey, so the other half, Ty, isn't with us today. But what we've always done with The Expanse, especially, is look to history. We've looked at other times in human history when something has changed profoundly and seen what the patterns are. By and large, that's a pretty good predictor for what we're going to do next time too. The details will change with the situation, but I think there's a kind of authenticity that comes from seeing how we've done it before and then finding something that rhymes. But I'm not gonna let Tade completely off the hook on this question. What is it? What's your process?
I think in one of my qualifications is in anthropology, and one of the features of anthropology is to consider human populations from many different aspects in terms, religion, language, marriage and sexuality, and so on. So whenever I think about anything like a concept or an idea, I actually run the idea through those different headings. What is it going to do to religion? What is it going to do to science? What is it going to do to currency? What will it do to dating? How does it intellectually affect people? What does a person's cosmology become when they go from I don't believe in aliens to, oh, aliens exist? And I try to put myself each time in those positions and then start to ask myself, okay, so I'm a guy, my world used to be going to the supermarket and coming back and, and people have gone to the moon, but that was it. And all of a sudden there's a world beyond the moon. And not only that, but they're here amongst us. What kind of moral panic am I going to experience here? So that's the way I look at it. And I don't start to write it until I've explored it and I found it to be interesting. I mean, there are other ideas that I might have that I find that on exploration, they fall flat. So there's actually no reason to continue. So if the exploration is interesting, then I query my characters and say, okay, fine, you're the person, you're living here, what does this do to you? And I go from there, basically.
All right. Let's move on to the next question.
I mean, who's... Okay. The next question is for you, but I think we said we would take it in turns.
I have one here that has 7
so
votes.
We can both answer.
I have one that's from Fiona that's specifically for you, Tade. She says, "I'd like to ask Tade about SF.
Go for it.
I'd like to ask Tade about SF as a genre in modern African culture. How popular is SF there, and what are the influences and literary/oral traditions that you draw upon?"
Okay. So, unlike, despite what you've been told, science fiction and fantasy have always been popular in Africa, at least in Black Africa. I can talk about where I come from. It's always been popular. Way back in the 70s, we had, superhero comics. We had Space 1999. We had all kinds of things that were ongoing. The things that were popular in the Western world were also popular over there. It was never a case of, is this a new thing or not? And people were, again, writing things and telling stories about science fiction or science fictional subjects, but they weren't necessarily being heard because there was no recognition of it. I mean, you may have heard from about the 80s, one of the mantras in the publishing world was that, well, Black people don't read science fiction and stuff. Now, there are reasons for that. It's more like, well, they weren't looking, because if you go back and look at photographs of Comic-Con from decades ago, you'll still see Black people there. And in fact, one thing there was a recent documentary on Netflix about, I think it was Apollo, one of the Apollo missions. And I was pleasantly surprised to find Black people in mission control, because all the photographs I'd seen prior to that, all of the, it had all been a bunch of people, a bunch of white people in short sleeves and glasses, feeling stressed and smoking. But when I watched this documentary, there were Black people in mission control, which kind of, I don't know, made me feel a bit warm. So the idea is that the influences, the people that influenced us are pretty much the same as influenced you. So we were influenced, you were inspired by Neil Armstrong going to the moon. We were inspired by all of the inventions that you see. We were inspired by Asimov. We were inspired by James Herbert's Dune. When I was a bit, a lot younger than I am now, I used to walk around in Lagos, and they had these piles of science fiction, remaindered science fiction books that were very, very cheap, and you could buy a whole bunch of them. And I would do that because they were cheap, and you would just take them home and read them, and then get another set. People were really into it. And when we were in school, in secondary school, we used to sit down and discuss and argue that really wasn't it creepy that Leia kissed Luke? It was really creepy, so the difference is only apparent. It's, it is literally the same. It is literally the same influences. To some extent, there is someone called Kojo Lang, who was a Ghanaian writer that not many people sometimes have heard of, and he died fairly recently. He wrote certain surrealistic books. He wrote one book called Lady of the Airplanes, where there's a town in Ghana that was quantum entangled with another town in Scotland and stuff. So the stories have been there. They just haven't had wide releases. But if you look at the African Speculative Fiction Society, there is a database there. There's a list of works by Africans on that site, and it's a living list. In other words, works are added to it day by day. So you can, if you have interest in African science fiction, you can find a lot of them there. So yeah, that's, I think. Did I miss any parts of that question?
I think you did a pretty good job there, as far as I can tell. So yeah, well done. It's also interesting. I feel like the kind of traditional roots of science fiction, as it has worked out in the market, have been very leaning in toward the U.S. and made to a lesser degree Europe. And I feel like that's actually changed. I feel like I'm seeing a lot more writers from other parts of the world, and I'm getting a lot more invitations to conventions and to speak at places that aren't the kind of traditional 8 places that I saw when I was growing up. That's hopeful.
Yeah. I got invited to some place in the Ukraine last year. I'd never even heard of the place before. I didn't even know that, there could be conventions in such a place, and I couldn't go, largely because I had some other commitment. But I would have loved to have gone there. Probably, I would bond over, like, how have you been managing? Have you been getting the books delivered on time? What films do you watch? It would have been a great conversation, a great learning event to have done that. Okay, so for Daniel Abraham, let's see which one. I've got this one that is 9 votes. Okay, so for Daniel, oops, wait, here we are. It keeps moving. It keeps moving around. Okay, how have the titles of The Expanse been chosen? It's fascinating to me to see how they all relate to some element of history or culture and make obscure yet spot-on references. So do you look through specific time periods of history to choose titles, or do you try to draw on history as a whole?
Well, we kind of started off with...
sorry, this is from Nick. Nick says this.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick. We started off with Leviathan, Wakes, and Ty, in addition to being a student of history, is very conversant with the Bible, and his favorite period in history is kind of Babylonian era. So a lot of what we wound up doing draws from that era, and we locked ourselves in because we did Leviathan, Wakes for the first one, and then Caliban's War, and then we kind of had this thing now where we had to have 3 syllables of somebody mythological or historical doing or saying or owning something that's preferably global. And that actually narrows things down more than we would have thought. We were making jokes about, book 9 being Melpomene sneezed because we just ran out of stuff. And actually, the 3rd book was supposed to be called Dandelion Sky, also in that thing. But the editor at the time thought that sounded too pastoral, so we went with Abaddon's Gate for that. But generally speaking, we try to find 3 syllables from someplace close to history, and then some way to land it. I'm glad it's working for you. I'm glad we've done well enough. I'm glad that there aren't 12 books in the series, because we're running out.
All right. Just quick questions that's similar to that. I know that you and Ty wrote the episode Windmills, yes?
Yeah.
I think that was in the first season. Did you come up with that title as well, or was the title dictated to you?
The title came out of the writer's room process, which is so communal and so kind of borderless. It's very hard to say who came up with that title. I don't have any idea actually where that came from. I mean, it's a Don Quixote reference, as is everything we do. But whose idea, I couldn't speak. But I have one here. I have a question here from Anna Callius, specifically. Tade, I can see a bookshelf behind you. Could you pick 2 or 3 favorites from the selection we see there? I can only spot Hilary Mantel.
Okay. Well, Hilary Mantel is one of my favorite writers. There are other books of her scattered in this. This is my panic room, by the way. This is where I hide from the rest of the family. So I have other books of hers, close by. There's Bolano 2666, which is a sprawling, gigantic book of his, which was it was published after he was dead. He wanted it to be in 5 separate books, but his estate decided it would be better as a single book. And I really, it's a book that I just really love, and I love to pick it up and dip into it from time to time. Also, there's Alessandro Barrico, Ocean Sea. which I really love for its lyricism. So I pick it up, and beside it is Silk, which I also love. And then you'll see Ian Banks, The Wasp Factory. You know, these are books that I love to dip in because I love certain passages from them. So when I'm stuck with anything I'm doing, I pick any one of the books that you see behind me, and I just kind of flip through them, and I find them inspiring. You know, so I can't pick a favorite from them, but they're very, they all are quite they're quite. They're more like I find them stimulating. You know, favorite wouldn't be the right word. I find them stimulating more than anything else. It's like so like one of them, like back there you can see Jeff Vandermeer's City of Saints and Madmen. You know, I love that. It's so insane that flipping through it just kind of it blows my mind, and that, you know, when I get stuck, those are the things that loosen up my thinking. So yeah. Does that help, Anna? Is that what you want? Okay, good. Yeah.
Speaking for a moment,
all right. So
I'm going to break in. I just want to say, City of Saints and Madmen was actually, when my wife and I got married, it was one of the things on our wedding registry. So we have the hard copy of Vandermeer's City of Saints and Madmen from the marriage.
Excellent. Did that cover? I've never seen the hardcover, but does it have the story on the back as well?
I believe so, and it has a lot of things that are encrypted that I haven't broken the code for yet. Oh, we lost this a second. You're back. Okay.
No, I'm still here. Yeah. Well, apparently some people cracked that code. It's on the internet somewhere, but I haven't been able to do that. So I've just left it as ones and zeros. I didn't bother looking for it.
It feels like cheating.
I somehow feel like I'm supposed to absorb it.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like I'm supposed to absorb it in some way. You know? Okay, so I've got 8 votes for Daniel Abraham, so let's do that. Okay, so Daniel, how do you handle writing a story? This is from Nick. I don't know if it's the same Nick, but this is a Nick. How do you handle writing a story that takes place over decades of a fictional universe? Is there any element of writing such a time-spanning story that is actually easier than writing shorter form literature?
That's an interesting question. Actually, The Expanse is the second series that I've written that takes decades and decades and decades. The first thing I wrote, first book series I wrote was called The Long Price Quartet. And part of the world building, part of the shtick, part of the structure of that one was that each book had about a 15-year gap in between it. So you saw the same people and how they had changed since the last kind of incarnation in their lives. And one of the things that I really like about that structure, and I like it in The Expanse, and I liked it in that one, was you get to have a conversation about aging, to have a conversation about how the person you are at 50 looks at the person you are when you were 20, and how those two are related, and how they're not. And you get it for free when you have something that's also taking the readers a long time to get through. You have that sense of distance. You can do it in a short form too, but it's kind of cooked into a novel series like that.
It seems like a lot of work for short form literature.
I think in short form literature, you have to be much more mindful of the craft part and the structures that you're building into a short piece. You could do something where that was kind of the nugget at the center of the story and have it work, but I don't know that you could tell a story outside of that. I think having two ideas like that in a short story would be tricky for me.
I hadn't thought so myself, yes.
And here we have an 11 vote question from Anna Callius again. Which sci-fi authors or anthropologists, in the case of Tade, have inspired you?
Okay, so this is really difficult.
We only have an hour.
So this is a very difficult question to answer because I read everything and I read a whole lot of things, but generally it's not authors. It's somehow it's particular books rather than authors themselves. So it's particular books. So for example, there is a book called Animal Money by Michael Sisko that I really love. It's completely batshit crazy, but I love it because it's batshit crazy. I've already mentioned City of Saints and Madmen, which I really admire. Wolf Hall, like we've said already. The works of Jack Kirby, not his art. I know I'm kind of going off the author thing, although when it comes to comics, authorship is a very debated concept. Like the artist can also be an author, especially if you're using what's called the Marvel style, which I'm going to try not to go into. If you don't think we can, I'm going to start digressing. But Jack Kirby is a person who I consider to be an author of comics as well as an artist, and I find his work very inspirational. Thomas Ligotti, I like his work. It's very dark, but I really like his work. Some of the old classics, things like Dune. I'm such a big fan of Dune that even the ones that, the Chapter House Dunes and the Dune Messiah, where people started to falter in their love for Dune, I didn't falter at all. I just loved the whole thing all the way through. It's very difficult to choose. It's extremely difficult to choose. I guess I just really love books. There's a book called Perfume by Patrick Suskind, for example. Yeah. I really love that. Yeah, it's a great book for me. I just really love it. There's a crime writer called Don Wilson. Mm-hmm. He writes a lot about the Sicario, the Mexican border, the drug trade, and like he writes, but his writing is just so great and so crisp. I like Peter Straub because of the way he writes. I like Kate Elliott because of her the way she writes about space or her fantasy. I mean, Kate Elliott is just so widely underappreciated as far as I'm concerned. Her work is really, really good, and it's she's written such a multitude of different topics that I don't know why she's not better known. I'm a really big Ursula Le Guin fan, really big. Not just her fiction, but her essays. And I don't think, she wrote a whole lot of stuff, but I really don't think there's anything of hers that I haven't read, any of her essays or any of her fiction. And even when I reread what she's written, there's always something new that I seem to pick up from it. So it's very difficult for me to choose. I've just kind of given, I would have left some out, but it's a difficult choice for me. I just, I hope that's, I hope that helps. Hope that's good.
I have this thing. I don't know if you do or not. I have a hard time reading in the genre I am writing at the moment. So I read a lot of Arthur Clarke and Bester and a great wealth of science fiction when I was young and when I was kind of early in my career. But ever since I've been doing The Expanse, so for the last decade, it's been really hard to read science fiction because so much of my head is already there. I find myself reading a lot of horror and a lot of nonfiction and a lot of things that are kind of outside. Just so I have some variety in my mental space.
I found that too. I think I read a lot more of nonfiction when I'm actively writing. When I'm writing a book and stuff, I read a lot more of nonfiction. I read a lot more primary sources about everything from the science to orbital mechanics and all of that. Because my head is full of the things that we saw. It's full of Star Wars and it's full of Star Trek. And sometimes, many times those things don't actually follow usual orbital mechanics.
No.
So going to primary sources is probably the best thing for that kind. For that to, I see what you mean. I mean, I don't, I can't read genre while I'm writing it.
Right.
During the writing process, it's very difficult for me to do. I just basically say, okay, look, nonfiction, or I'll read some other genre entirely.
Now, I'm just going to note here on the sidebar here, we've got a comment from NK that said, "Oh no, I want horror Rex." So I got one. There's one. It's called The Cosmology of Monsters. I just read it like 3 or 4 weeks ago by a guy named Hamill, and it's probably the best book I've read this year. So I just saw it going by. I thought I'd chime in because I had one.
Horror Rex, look, I would say The Ghost by Peter Straub is one of them. I would say Drowning Girl by Caitlin Kernan.
However that's best pronounced.
I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right.
I can't tell you. I've read the name a lot.
I really. Yeah. To be honest, anything by Paul Tremblay. I haven't read a bad Paul Tremblay book yet. You can try his short fiction one, Growing Things, I believe it's called. That really kind of works very, very well. Victor Laval, if you can read The Ballad of Black Tom, I think that's really, I think that kind of worked very, very well for me and everything. So that's all that kind of comes to my head right now. It's not a question I was expecting. Okay, so let's see. Here's a question for Daniel, which I think has 10. Let me see if there's anyone that has more. 1 second. All right, I'll go with this. So for Daniel, since you're heavily involved in the writing of the TV show, how do you go about making plot changes and decision on what to include? This is from Martha. For example, book 1, season 1, spoiler. The choice of how Fred Johnson gets the protomolecule sample is very different in the show versus the book.
Yeah, the experience of retelling the same story that I'd already done in a new medium has fascinating. And one of the things that we talk about a lot in the writer's room and with the showrunner and me and Ty is what you are privileging in that translation. Whether you're trying to keep all of the events the same and you're really kind of focusing in on having the plot and the characters match what they did last time, or if you're privileging the spirit of the thing, where you can change just all kinds of things, but the underlying story that you're telling is the same one. And that's a weird kind of metaphysical concept of the story being independent somehow of the details that make up the story, but necessarily we have to change a bunch of stuff just because there's a lot of things that work in prose that don't work with a camera, and once you've started embracing those changes, the shifts and the differences that we've made for the show have all been a balancing act between staying true to the story that we did before and also not staying so true to it that we compromise the story that we're telling on screen. So with the example given, we changed the way that Fred got the protomolecule because the way he got it in the show made more sense for the show. And it did things that we wanted to get done in the show that we hadn't been able to do, or we had been able to do in the book through the tool set of prose. And, I wish I could say there was a good, solid metric or an algorithm that we used to figure that out. A lot of it is what feels right in the moment.
Okay. Did you get a sense, I don't know how to describe this. Did you get a sense of loss when you had to change it from what your idea was in the books?
Not at all.
Okay.
One of the things that happened in the first season when we were in the writer's room, there was a really gorgeous moment in the books. And we kept trying to find where to place it in season 1. And every place we put it, it was every place we put it, there was already something else that was doing what needed to be done for the story there. So I had to talk.
Yes.
I had to talk our showrunner into losing this gorgeous moment that I had written because it just didn't work. It just wasn't right for what we were doing. But it was so flattering that he was in love with it. But now we had to kill that, so it died.
Well, it's still in the book, so it's not dead. It's just it's in some other realm of some other reality. It's not dead. It's just not on screen.
Well, and one of the things that we talk about too is retelling stories and what happens to stories when you retell them and how they change, and the difference between a continuity and a mythos. And I think the more you retell the same story in different versions that are all kind of co-equal, there's one canonical answer, the more you build this into a kind of a mythos, which is more interesting to me than a continuity. Okay,
we're getting some follow-up questions saying people want to know what the moment was.
Okay,
what the specific moment was.
The specific moment that we had in the book that did not show up in season 1 and that I helped kill, was the moment when Miller's partner Octavia Muss explained to him that he was the joke of the Force, and he hadn't known that before. There was this critical, terrible moment in the book, and it didn't fit with the version that we had in the screenplay.
Okay, fair dues.
All right, let's see what we got here. That's next. We got a 9. We got another 9. I think we got a 9 here that specifically, this one is for Tade, so I'm going to go with that. This is from Aditya, however that's best pronounced. And it just vanished. So, Ellen, what do you do with it? Oh, there it is. There it is. This one is for Tade. Earlier, you were giving us a perspective on SF and its popularity in Africa. As someone who is settled in the UK, how does the difference in experiencing being a part of the diaspora and not the original culture come through in writing? And could you please talk a little bit about that conflict? We're really glad that's your question.
Well, okay, so I may have not, I may have not been very, very clear about my positioning. So I was actually born in the UK. The UK was actually my original, this is where I was born. This is where I was, and I kind of moved back and forth. There was a big move in the 70s to take your children back to Africa for them to learn their culture and their language and stuff, which has advantages and disadvantages or whatever. So I kind of already had a view of both of them, and I think I've lost the actual question now. Can I thought the question would be I thought it was going to be highlighted or something. I can't find the question.
How does the difference in experiencing being a part of the diaspora and not the original culture come through in writing? And could you please talk a little bit about that conflict?
All right. So the problem is that I don't specifically identify as an individual who is diaspora or not diaspora. I am both Nigerian and I am British as well. So to me, they're both. I belong in both. Therefore, they are both part of me and I'm part of them. So it's very difficult. I don't see myself as a stranger in any of the lands. And that would mean that if I'm speaking for the diaspora, I will really be talking about my own singular experience rather than this is what it feels like to be in the diaspora from either one. So now that I'm in the UK, I feel alienated a little bit, for example, from Nigeria. I feel a little bit alienated from it. I don't get as many opportunities to speak Yoruba, the language of my forebears, or to speak Akan, which is my mother was born in Ghana. So I don't have opportunities to speak those languages. I don't have opportunities to get more of the books in that language. So I feel like I'm losing my skills in the languages as well, and I have a sense of loss from that. And so I think what I sometimes try to do is to capture my culture in my writing in some way or the other. It may be a tiny thing. It may be a large thing, but I try to make sure that it's captured in some way. So I based the City of Rosewater, a large part of it I based on Yoruba culture, because that's the culture that I am forgetting by not being there. That's the culture I'm missing. It's the food I'm missing. It's the dancing and the smiles of people, and they're like, all of that. I'm missing all of that. So I put all of that in there. There are things that are very different. Like especially in London, there's a lot of frowning. People are either frowning or they're very emotionally continent is the word I would use. So they're not very people don't release their affects. They don't let themselves be seen. Whereas it is frowned upon to be that continent back home. Back home, you express yourself, you smile and all of that. So there's a conflict between those two things that I see, and you miss it. You miss the warmth. So I try to put those things in the writing, but I'm not particularly aware of specific things that it brings to the writing. One of the things I can say is that when I wrote The Murders of Molly Southbourne, for example, I got very interesting reactions to it because the main character is white. She's white. She's British. She's a British farm girl, and I got people today. I got told that the book was tedious because it featured a white woman. That's what I got told today, and I'm like, well, look. Why did you tell me that? I don't need to hear that, and I don't need to know. But I don't care either. But I don't care either because I write about human beings. I write about people. I don't write about where a person is from. I write about people. So I don't care that much what people think in terms of why you're writing a person from this background or that background. I don't care. What I do care about is that I represent a human being, who is as real as possible and as emotional as possible and comes across as, a person that a reader can empathize with. I don't actually care about my politics or the demographics of the person in the book. I don't care about that. I just want to represent a human being, So it's my answer is a bit tangled, I suppose, but that's what I can say, I guess.
Yeah, I have a weird place in the kind of cultural identity. I was born and I've lived my whole life in New Mexico, where this is clearly not a landscape that people like me spent the Pleistocene here. I'm clearly a transplant here and always have been, which that's kind of the joy of it, right? I mean, I see a comment here that identities are tangled, and that's absolutely been my experience. Yeah,
they are. They're completely tangled. I mean, I remember, and this is about Ty, but when we were in Comic-Con last year, Ty and I started talking, and we were talking about boxing and about music and all of that. And it turns out, I seem to remember that Ty was saying that he actually grew up in a neighborhood with a lot of black people.
Yep.
So
Ty.
Yeah. And he knew movies and songs that I never even knew other people knew about them. Because I've never actually found people who could remember those songs, and he remembered all of them.
Yeah.
So yeah, identity is a big mishmash of all kinds of things, and but that's a good thing as far as I'm concerned. It's a good thing. It's a good thing for us to recognize that it's not simple, and it's not the kind of thing where it's not something that you can dismiss. It's not something that you can't fix it with a slogan. It's complicated and it needs to be understood, and that's the way I see it. So yeah.
Cool.
Okay, so here's a question. There's a 9 here. 1 second. They keep moving about these things.
They keep updating, right?
Yeah, 1 second. All right, you know what? I'm just gonna grab. Okay, 9. Why is it moving so fast? Okay, so number 9. This is from Aditya. This is from Aditya.
right.
Did you undergo formal training or follow a curriculum yourself in writing? And how did you develop your skill?
That's a really interesting question. I intentionally was not an English major because I wanted to be a writer. When I was in high school, I came across a quote from Kurt Vonnegut that said, "An English department of the university is where literature disappears up its own asshole." And I was very impressed at the time, being in high school, because an adult had said the word asshole, and it was really impressive. So I,
with diagrams too,
right? I mean, that's shocking when you're 17, or was when I was 17. It was a younger time. What I did, though, was I was in conversations and in mentorship with a lot of writers in New Mexico. We have actually a really vibrant community here, and always kind of have. So we had, Roger Zelazny was here. Fred Saberhagen, who was one of my first mentors, was here. Susie Mickey Charnas is here. George, of course, is here. Stephen Donaldson was here. This kind of, who's who of major names in the field when I was growing up were all here to talk to, and they all hung out at the local convention, and they taught at the university, and I could proctor their classes. And so working with people who were actually working writers was critical for me. And like that, I read just a lot of books, just a lot of them. And then talking specifically about how you develop your skill, I wrote a bunch of terrible stuff. I wrote a bunch of I mean, decades of just awful stuff. And eventually I got better.
Yeah, the terrible stuff has to come out, doesn't it? I mean, I think you just have to do that.
Yeah, no, I think that is absolutely a part of the process. Ty was talking to somebody on Twitter a while back, and they were, how do you become a good writer? And he said, you write a lot. And somebody thought that he was being glib and dismissive. And actually, it's like there's no other way to say that. Yes, sometimes that sounds glib and dismissive, but since it's literally true, I don't know what you can do. All right.
Yeah, somebody said that it was like when you turn on a tap for the first time, and all the rust in the pipes comes out, so it comes out red, and you have to keep the water flowing until it begins to clear up. And so the idea is that, look, when you start to write, it's going to be coming out rusty, and it's going to be rust, and you keep on writing over and over and over again, and this will take ages, but sooner or later it will start becoming clear.
And I don't know a better process. I don't. If there's a shortcut, I haven't found it. All right. I have a 9 vote here from Michelle Warble. When you realized you had had success with your writing, did you celebrate by splurging on something? If so, what?
My biggest splurge has been actually this room I'm speaking in right now. Basically, I converted a space on my property into a proper study. So if we had had this conversation 6 months ago, we would have been having it in my attic, which is where I did most of my writing. But basically, I took a lot of the money that I made, and I literally had them build me an actual study with actual shelves built into the wall where I could move all my books in and be private from the rest of the family. So that is really what I did. I made myself a salt mine where I could do all my writing without being disturbed. And that was my luxury.
Yeah. So to follow up on that, when did you realize you had had success with your writing? What was the moment when you thought, oh wait, I am the person who I wanted to become?
I think, okay, so let me put it this way. When I started writing, all I really wanted was a little bit of money to come in so that I can use it to buy books, because I really, really like books. So I thought, okay, if I just write and, I sell a few stories to, to a small press or to a semi-pro zine or something, then I'll just be using that money as my monthly book budget, so I could buy whatever books I wanted. Because every time I spend money on a book or whatever, I'd be asking myself, oh, did you really need to buy that book? Are you just going to make your TBR pile bigger and bigger and bigger? So my modest thing was, I just wanted to pay for my books, right? And I met and exceeded that a long, long, long time ago. So I think the moment I started thinking, I really thought, okay, hang on, I really need to think here, was I think 2018, when I got a royalty check. I got one royalty check of £20,000, and it was like, okay, hang on a second, I have to declare this stuff on tax now. If it's taxable income, it's significant then, and that's a thing that I actually have to do. It's paperwork. It's like I have to send it to an accountant and all of that. So I think that was when it started dawning on me that, okay, actually, hang on, this is going better than I thought. I think that winning the Arthur C. Clarke Award was a big thing for me, because, again, I had read his books when I was younger, and I had, I've been following the prize for a long time. So winning that was a very big thing for me. I had something on my bucket list, which was, there's a magazine called Interzone in the UK, which I had, I'd read for about 20 years or so. And I always wanted to get a story in there, and I did. So I did that in 2017, I believe. So I thought, aha, good, tick that off. But I think that mainly in 2018, I think when I sold 3 of my properties, I sold Making Wolf, my first novel. I sold The Apologist, which is a short story was being adapted, and I sold The Murders of Molly Southbourne. So when that started to happen, and it really became, a lot more money is coming in, and there's a lot more to do, because, again, with the idea of success means a lot more work, because you get a lot more requests to do this and to do that. You get a lot more, what are you working on now? So you have to buckle down and write it. There are fewer, you have to then deliver the things you sign off for, that sort of thing. So I think I would say 2018, 2019, I realized it. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Fair enough.
I feel like I rambled a bit. Okay. For Daniel Abraham, was most of the overall arc of the 9-book Expanse series laid out in advance?
Yes.
And this is from NK.
So it's a good question. We wrote the first book. We wrote Leviathan Wakes just for shits and giggles on Ty's day off of work, just for fun. And which was Wednesdays. And as part of selling it, we said, I was the expert on books. You see, Ty knew about a bunch of other stuff, but I could still kind of lord it over him with books a little bit. And I was saying, well, this will sell better if we can have some suggestion there might be more books after it if it goes well. It makes it more likely to sell if there's the opportunity. So we did like 2 little short 1-paragraph. Here's what the next book might be if you wanted a next book thing. And books will sell better. It's more likely to sell if it's part of a series. And so we came up with a series name. And that was all we had right then. But we got to but when the first book got nominated for the Hugo and started selling really well, and it was like, well, okay, maybe this thing is legs. we sat down with our publisher and we said, okay, do you want more? Because we're writing book 2, and book 3 can be the end, but it's going to be, if it's not going to be the end, you need to tell us so that we can start, planning this out. And the publisher said, yes, no, more would be very good, please. And then, so while we were in the process of writing Caliban's War, the second book, we did a full arc outline of the series, and there were 2 versions of that. There was one that was 12 books long, and there was one that was 9 books long. And the more we looked at it, the more the 12-book one looked like it had like 3 really sort of vamping daddy, why are we doing these books? So we just took those out. And you can see where they would have gone in reading the books. And we have known since 2011 what the last scene of the story is.
All right.
We knew very early where we were ending this, and that hasn't changed.
Is it part of your planning process to know the end first? You start from the end.
Well, it's useful in the planning process to know what we're aiming towards, even if everything in the middle is kind of loose and uncertain and discovered as we go along. Having a clear idea of what the end point is kind of lets me know what the story is we're telling. So yeah, that's always been a part of what we've done. And the next, we have a 3-book series under contract for when the Expanse is done. And I don't know, I mean, there's a bunch about that I don't know yet, but I know the last scene. Okay. I know the end of book 3 of that series. All right. This is from Steve Anderson. It's completely off topic. What do you do for fun when you're not writing? What are your hobbies?
All right. I am completely insane about martial arts. I have studied karate, taekwondo, and mixed martial arts. Actually, I'm quite afraid right now because of the lockdown. I haven't been to the gym in ages. Therefore, I'm afraid because I'm pretty sure that I'm fat and I'm rusty and they're going to kick my ass when I get back in there. I paint. I like painting. I like arts. I like museums. I like to learn about arts and stuff like that, which is rather geeky on its own. I like music a whole lot. I like music of all kinds. I like old songs quite a bit. Jazz, funk. I like swing. Strangely enough, my wife has had me compile a list of 1,000 songs that I would listen to if I were in a coma. And I know it sounds morbid, but because she wouldn't be able to choose. You see, so yeah, those are my hobbies. And I like reading. Reading is also my hobby. It's work, but it's also a hobby. I really love reading. I don't think there are very few hobbies that can match reading a very good book. And right now I'm reading this. I've read it before. I don't know if it's coming out.
Oh yeah, right? yeah.
It's Italo. Yeah, okay, yeah. It's Italo Calvino, and it's so mind bending. Each chapter, a person goes to buy a book, and then he reads the first chapter, and then he goes to the second chapter, and it's blank. So he takes it back to the bookshop, and then they give him a different copy, and then it's a different book entirely. And then each time it's a different book. So it resolves itself, but it's so interesting and mind-bending the way it's written. So yeah, I like reading too.
All right.
Okay, so let's see. Daniel, what is or was your biggest pet peeve when you were starting to read science fiction? Has this impacted the way you write novels? And if so, how? This is from David.
When I started reading science fiction, not when I started writing, when I started reading science fiction, I had no critical faculties at all. I had no pet peeves. I had no peeves. I had no taste. I had no sophistication. I was just front loading everything into my head that I could possibly get. As I became more and I started writing more, I developed some pet peeves. I especially dislike the idiot character who is there to have the exposition explained to them. That's always been a problem for me. Also, and this is weirdly specific. I hate the part where you get hit on the head and you just lose consciousness for a little while and then you wake back up and you're fine. That's so not even vaguely true. That it throws me out whenever I run into it in whatever medium. So
yeah.
And I'm sure there are like a host of others. There's like a whole toolbox of things I disliked and that I respond to kind of unconsciously now. Those are the two that I can think of the front of my head.
Yeah, I hate that as well. Like you hit someone on the head, it means something. And in real life, people don't fall unconscious like that. And most of the time, if you hit someone hard enough to make them unconscious, you're probably going to kill them.
Right?
Because if you hit them if you hit them that hard, it's not, they're not going to just, and faint, and then all of a sudden they're awake again. That's not going to happen. They're going to have a hematoma. They're going to be in problems.
So I'm going to riff on that for a second. One of the things that I really dislike about what science fiction has done is the way that it has miseducated the readers.
Yes.
We have absolutely, I mean, the idea of clones was a doppler, and that's not at all what clones are. That's not even sort of.
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence. Now we are in the process of miseducating the public about artificial intelligence.
Nanotechnology.
And nanotechnology. There's just this ways in which we use things to be a metaphor at the expense of how it actually works. I think we have something to answer for on that.
We do, yeah, because something like nanotechnology is used like magic. It might as well be magic in the way we use it. And then people will then say that thing that, oh yes, well, to a sufficiently advanced technology will look like magic to a less, they will trot that one out as if it explains it. One of the things that I think that we get wrong, but I think that it's not entirely our fault, has to do with robots. So because of what like Boston Robotics and all of them, what they do, the kind of advertisements we see from them, we actually think robots can do more than they can actually do. So one of the things, for example, one of the things you could point at is the video of the somersaulting robot. All right. What they don't show you is the number of outtakes, and they don't show you that task is the thing that it can do. It takes ages and ages and ages to program that to be done. And it doesn't mean that this robot is going to autonomously be going around doing somersaults whenever it feels like it. A lot of what we see, they're highly edited footage that we see. It gives us the wrong impression about what robots can do. So I guess part of our question then should be, is how much is it our responsibility to be true to the science as opposed to true to the metaphor?
I like fantasy. I like metaphor. I think I'm very fond of just trotting out a metaphor and literalizing it and having the guy wake up and he's an insect. I don't need a nano explanation of anything for that to work. I say that as a guy who writes, Wikipedia plausible science fiction. But I think a base level, not just misinforming people, is at least a kindness.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things for me has been that my experience has always been, when I was younger, like when I was like 5 and 6 and 7, DC Comics was in that phase where they were very it was important to them to inform their young readers. So I learned about, the first time I read the word chlorophyll was in a Superman comic, for example. The first time I read about the characteristics of a mammal was in a Batman comic. The idea for DC Comics was that you had to educate people. And I think that from that point on, in my head, I've always had it like, look, whatever it is you write, there must be at least one true thing or one factual thing in your writing, in the thing that you are delivering to people, that you had a responsibility to educate as well as to entertain, in a sense. So that's kind of always been in my head.
For me, the example I have for that, there's a Scott Westerfeld book that is a kind of teen vampire story called Peeps, that is also the best introductory parasitology text I've seen.
Excellent. You know.
All right, I think we're at an hour now. Do you want to try getting in one more and calling it a day?
Yes, let's get one more in. Let's get one more in.
Who asked the last one?
I think it's your question.
Okay.
I think it's as in you have to ask me.
I'm looking. Okay, we've got one here for both writers. How do you balance the writing craft, prose, description, structure with the science fiction, research, allegory, etc.? So that's this is a good last question since we've already kind of halfway answered it.
All right.
There's also a follow-up here.
Okay.
Hold on. There's also a follow-up. It says also what kind of research do you actually do? For example, the Expanse is famous for scientific accuracy. So balancing research and allegory, and what kind of research you do. Take it.
Okay. Right. So first things first, never let research get in the way of writing the story. So one of the disciplines of craft is to actually just get the whole thing finished. So I will often, because I generally tend to read very, very widely, when I read something and I think, actually, this will probably make a good story, I will let it percolate and start thinking about it and maybe reading more and more around it. And when I get to a specific point, I'll think, maybe this is interesting. So then I have to wait until I find a character that can animate whatever research I've done. An example is for Rosewater. One of the ways it came about was that I like reading declassified CIA files, and I was reading about MK Ultra and about the experiments on mind control, and that was in my head for a while. And I kept reading and reading and reading, and then I read an article. I think that was about 2011 or so, about these conjoined twins who could think each other's thoughts because they had a strip of neuron that was connecting both of them by the brain. So they could hear each other's thoughts. And I thought, okay, fine. That would actually be a basis for telepathy, for, if there was something actually connecting it. I mean, it wouldn't be real telepathy as per the definition, but people, if you had a very thin neuron between them, that could possibly work. And so I set off and started writing it. And what happens is you can't let the research stop, because the research can easily become an excuse for not writing. So I set off and I started writing it. And I wrote it to the end because I wanted to let me just get this idea out, and then I can do the research to make sure that each individual aspect actually holds up. And it doesn't have to be completely factual, because this is not a scientific journal. Sometimes I go for fact adjacent. If it's close enough and if it can be extrapolated from what we know now, then I'm quite happy to just go with that. It's a book. If I have to choose between the science and the metaphor, I choose the metaphor. And that's kind of what I do. I hope that answers it.
I followed it. Sounds right to me.
I don't get bogged down in research. Yeah.
All right. So that's
okay. So I think we can sneak in one more.
One more? All right.
We can sneak in one more for you.
All right.
Yeah. I think maybe both of us can answer this, because we'll try and keep it short. What's your favorite fun fact that you've learned while doing research for your writing?
Well, the thing that so much of the things that I do aren't actually research that I do for my writing. I just write about stuff I'm already interested in. So it comes, it feels like it comes for free. But favorite fun fact, Okay, I will go with this one. It turns out you can survive in hard vacuum for about 15 seconds and be just fine.
Okay. And this question was from Fucha, by the way. My answer to that question is I found out that space smells like steak.
Ooh, and the moon smells
So
like gunpowder.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard that too. I heard that
Yeah.
one too. Although I was wondering if it wasn't because of the boosters and stuff, but you know, but apparently space smells like steak. So yeah, that's the fun fact.
All right. Well,
Okay, so
I think we're good. You think we're good?
Yep, I think this has been fun. This has been great. I think the questions have been really great, and I think this has been a very. I think I really liked, you know, the questions you've asked and the comments that you've been putting on the side. I've been reading the comments. I can't comment on both of them at the same time, but I've been reading them. And I also, you know, I also read the questions, the other questions that we didn't get to answer. I've been reading them as well. You know, feel free. I'm on Twitter. You can just send me a, you know, tweet a question at me on Twitter. I'll try to answer it. I can't promise I'll get to it, but I'll try to. You know?
I can do that too. That sounds good. All right.
All right.
It has been a pleasure, sir.
Well,
Always
you.
good talking to you.
All right. Same here. And don't get into any kind of despair because of the lockdown.
I'm in America. I got all kinds of reasons to despair. All right. But
True.